anos, etc, etc, etc. Bom, então, se a gente vai fazer uma análise crítica, que todos nós podemos fazer, nós temos obrigação de fazer, quando sai uma notícia dessa, leia o trabalho, e nós temos conhecimento suficiente para perceber que nenhuma condição de ensaio testada na pesquisa, seja tempo ou temperatura, se aplica ao uso real do adoçante em café ou chá. O hábito usual do consumidor é a adição do adoçante à bebida imediatamente antes do consumo, com um líquido em temperatura próxima de 65 graus. Segundo, o comportamento de uma substância química submetida isoladamente a temperaturas elevadas não é necessariamente o mesmo daquele observado quando ela está numa matriz alimentar, okay? Na presença de outros ingredientes. Ou seja, os dados do estudo não podem ser diretamente extrapolados para alimentos assados ou forneados. Se fosse assim, qualquer produto que vai ao forno que tivesse açúcar, teria o açúcar queimado também. Mas ele está numa matriz alimentar ligada a outras moléculas e protegido. Então, não se pode extrapolar esse comportamento, né, para o alimento em si. Segundo, compostos organoclorados, tipo HPA clorado, são contaminantes ambientais largamente distribuídos e podem ser encontrados em alimentos como carnes, peixes e produtos lácteos, sem que isso signifique que o consumidor vai ter câncer por consumir. Okay? O homem está diariamente exposto a substâncias potencialmente tóxicas formadas durante o processamento de alimentos, como é o caso de acrilamida em batata frita. A acrilamida é uma substância genotóxica. E é encontrado em batata frita, café, pães e cereais, e os HPAs que estão em churrascos, em alimentos defumados. Ou seja, o nosso organismo está exposto diariamente a substâncias potencialmente carcinogênicas, mas isso não significa que vai se desenvolver um câncer, existe um risco. Hein? E, para concluir, as evidências científicas não confirmam que o uso do adoçante sucralose em produtos como café, chá, bolos e tortas representa um risco para a saúde do consumidor. A avaliação do risco da exposição humana a derivados clorados que possam resultar da decomposição da sucralose em alimentos aquecidos somente poderá ser feita quando estiverem disponíveis dados quantitativos da presença desses compostos nos alimentos prontos para o consumo, submetidos ao aquecimento em condições reais. Ou seja, as informações que foram veiculadas após a publicação desse trabalho não são verdadeiras, não são corretas. E é por isso que dos objetivos desse encontro é realmente desmistificar e comentar sobre falar ciência, trazer ciência para vocês, e não convicções pessoais ou escolhas pessoais de indivíduos que não gostam de aditivos, não gostam de uma série de ingredientes, ou mesmo de componentes naturais. Não são só os aditivos, nós temos hoje lactose, glúten, todos na peneirinha, né? Assim, substâncias que agora são do mal, como são todas as substâncias adicionadas em alimentos, isso segundo o ponto de vista de alguns indivíduos. Bom, então, eu vou terminar aqui, porque nós vamos agora entrar numa programação intensa. Aproveitem, perguntem, vocês vão perceber que nós temos um tempo relativamente extenso, né, para perguntas, acho que são 20 minutos, e a ideia é que vocês realmente saiam daqui com suas dúvidas quase que totalmente esclarecidas, vamos dizer, que vocês divulguem, compartilhem essas informações com seus pares. Façam como os blogueiros, né? Coloquem no Face, coloquem na internet e vamos multiplicar a informação boa para que o consumidor não tenha que, a cada vez que sai uma informação incorreta, jogar fora o produto que tem na sua casa. Okay? Então, muito obrigado. E eu vou agora voltar ao meu posto de coordenadora aqui. Bem, vocês todos já tiveram a oportunidade de ler a programação, não é? Vocês viram que nós vamos abordar diferentes aspectos associados aos edulcorantes. Esses temas, né, foram definidos, foram escolhidos em função das dúvidas manifestadas por profissionais da saúde em relação a esses temas, algumas polêmicas. Então, nós buscamos os principais especialistas na área e trouxemos para vocês. Então, aproveitem bastante e não saiam daqui curiosos ainda. Então, nós vamos iniciar agora com o tema edulcorantes. Existe risco de carcinogenicidade? Ou, em inglês, sweeteners, do they bear carcinogenic risk? E essa apresentação vai ser feita pelo Dr. Ashley Roberts, da Intertek Scientific and Regulatory Consultancy. O Dr. Ashley é vice-presidente sênior do grupo Food and Nutrition na Intertek Scientific and Regulatory Consultancy. Toxicologista regulatório com conhecimento extensivo em assuntos regulatórios internacionais. Tem experiência em desenvolvimento, condução e notificação de estudos clínicos e pré-clínicos. Na indústria de alimentos, foi responsável pelo desenvolvimento de estratégias científicas, garantindo segurança e ganhando aprovações regulatórias para novos ingredientes ao redor do mundo. Ele tem o título de Bachelor in Science, com honraria em Bioquímica na Universidade de Londres, é Ph.D. em Farmacologia e Toxicologia Clínica pela Universidade de Southampton, tem Pós-Doc em Metabolismo e Farmacocinética na Universidade de Southampton, foi membro ativo do ILSI, Chair do International Sweetener Association, Safety and Regulatory Committee. Welcome, Dr. Ashley. Now is our turn.
So, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in Sao Paulo. It's my second time here, and I'm really looking forward to watching the football this evening, being an Englishman, and there being several Brazilian players who play in the English league. So I'm really looking forward to that. But getting back to the point of my talk today, sweeteners, do they bear a carcinogenicity risk? And it's clear from Professor Toledo's initial talk why there is such an interest in this topic. And like she mentioned, there's a lot of information out there in social media and on the internet regarding sweeteners and carcinogenicity. And when I got this title for this talk, I did go to the internet to look to see what information is out there which is being passed to the consumer, which may give them grave concerns about the carcinogenicity of high-intensity sweeteners. And without going into too many details here, you can see that there's a lot of information regarding the carcinogenicity of individual sweeteners, and these are getting published in news articles, on the website, and so it's a great concern. And my talk today will really be to try and cover off some of these misconceptions that are being posted to the consumer, and it's my objective today to put all of this scaremongering into perspective, and I hope to do that during my talk and show that at the end of the day, high-intensity sweeteners do not pose any carcinogenicity risk. So, in my talk today, I've broken down it into several sections. The first being a general introduction. Maybe I'm going to take the same position as Professor Toledo here, as I can't see. General introduction, looking at the characteristics of the high-intensity sweeteners that are currently approved here in Brazil, looking at their structure, their sweetness potency, and how these materials are handled once they're consumed and ingested in the body. And then I'm going to look at how is the carcinogenicity of a high-intensity sweetener determined. You know, when we're developing a sweetener, what type of studies do we have to put in place to ensure their safety and their non-carcinogenicity? And I'll be looking at structure-activity relationships, genotoxicity studies, and as you're probably all aware, this is how the material may react with DNA and form genotoxic carcinogens. And then I'm going to be spending a lot of time looking at the results from actual carcinogenicity studies that are being conducted on high-intensity sweeteners. These carcinogenicity studies are obviously considered the gold standard for determining carcinogenicity of any ingredient, whether it be a high-intensity sweetener, an antioxidant, a preservative, or whatever. Then I'm going to be looking a little bit at post-marketing surveillance data, epidemiology studies. And even though I'm only talking for 40 minutes today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the carcinogenicity studies that are being conducted on each of these sweeteners listed here, which I believe are all approved and in the marketplace within Brazil. And then I'm going to touch on this topic here regarding recent controversies, and this has really ensued from a group of individuals, a scientific group in Italy, who've conducted some studies that I would say are not standard validated protocols and have come up with some results that go against what we know and that's what's published regarding the safety of high-intensity sweeteners. And then I'm just going to summarize and conclude at the end of my talk. So, looking first at the structures, sweetness, and the products. So we have here two high-intensity sweeteners that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Actually, aspartame and acesulfam K are usually combined in beverages, the reason being that they have a synergistic effect, that when you add the two together, they increase the sweetness. However, as you can see, these two molecules are very different, and they also react very differently when you ingest them. Aspartame here, once it gets to the gut, it's completely hydrolyzed. It's hydrolyzed down to aspartic acid, phenylalanine, and a small amount of methanol. So these are standard amino acids that we consume every day. And in fact, the amount of methanol, I'm led to believe, is equivalent to what you would consume in a glass of tomato juice. So this molecule never reaches the systemic circulation. It's hydrolyzed in the gut, and it's these components themselves that are absorbed. In contrast, acesulfam K goes in as acesulfam K and comes out as acesulfam K. The big difference being it's absorbed intact. So it goes into the blood supply and then is excreted in the urine. Both of these compounds are about 200 times sweeter than sugar, and both are FDA approved. If we look at neotame and advantame, essentially these are the daughters of aspartame. So they've been developed in relationship to aspartame, and you can see the similarities in the structures. It's just the side chains here that are a little different. But the big difference is that these materials are incredibly sweet. Neotame is roughly 7,000 to 13,000 times sweeter than sugar, whereas advantame is up to 20,000 times sweeter than sugar. So the development of these products was to increase the sweetness capacity of these materials. But the point being here that just like aspartame, these materials are hydrolyzed in the gut, and it's the actual components themselves that are absorbed into the systemic circulation. These materials themselves never reach the systemic circulation. I suppose we can call saccharin and cyclamate the grandfathers of high-intensity sweeteners. In fact, saccharin has been around for around 100 years and was introduced during the First World War when there was a shortage of sugar. These sweeteners were combined in a 1-to-10 ratio and blended and used in many different products. And again, you can see that the structures are very different. Saccharin itself is absorbed into the systemic circulation. It's not metabolized, and it is excreted as saccharin. Cyclamate, on the other hand, is absorbed to about 65%. It leaves about a 30% in the gut, and this 30% can be metabolized, and there are some individuals within the room here who will convert some cyclamate into cyclohexylamine, which is a known toxic metabolite. But it's very infrequent that happens. The last two sweeteners that I want to discuss are sucralose and steviol glycosides, although the structure I have put up here on the slide is stevioside. Sucralose, as Professor Toledo was just mentioning, this is a material that goes in as sucralose and comes out as sucralose. The big difference between acesulfam K and saccharin is that this isn't absorbed. It comes out in the feces. There's only a very small percentage that is absorbed, and that's glucuronidated and excreted. This compound is not degraded, so it's not hydrolyzed, and that's why it has no calories. Steviol glycosides, of which there are around 40, all have a similar structure. They have this steviol backbone, and then they're linked to various sugar moieties, whether that be glucose, rhamnose, or xylose. And once you ingest steviol glycosides, these sugar moieties get cleaved off in the gut, and it is the steviol backbone that gets absorbed, and then this, again, it's conjugated and excreted. The point I want to make here, having just gone through all of this, is that, as you've just seen, all of these structures are very different, and the way that they are handled is very different. So some high-intensity sweeteners are excreted in the feces, some are absorbed, some are metabolized in the gut. So to try and lump all of these high-intensity sweeteners together to say they're all carcinogenic is just not scientifically an appropriate point to make. Although these materials are sweet, other than that, they all have totally different characteristics. So to say they're all carcinogenic is not appropriate. I thought I would just add this slide, and this is a slide that currently outlines the approval status of all of these high-intensity sweeteners in the United States. And most of these went through the food additive process in the United States. And some of these took many, many years of review before they were finally approved. I was involved in the sucralose project, which took more than 10 years. So a review by FDA of more than 10 years. And this slide also shows what the acceptable daily intakes are for these various sweeteners. The only sweetener that hasn't gone through the food additive process but has GRAS status is that for the steviol glycosides. And these are just some of the products that sweeteners go into, as you're all very aware. They go into ice creams, beverages, jams, jellies, chewing gum. And the reason that everybody wants to use a high-intensity sweetener is that it reduces the amount of sugar that you have to include within a product, and therefore reduces the amount of calories. So how do we assess the carcinogenicity of a high-intensity sweetener, or of any food additive, come to that? There are a number of preclinical, non-clinical studies that we perform to show the safety of a food additive and to show that it's non-carcinogenic. If we were starting out developing a new high-intensity sweetener today, the first thing that we would do would be to look at the structure activity of that material. Does it contain any structural alerts that would indicate to us that this may be a carcinogen? So there are a number of databases that we would feed the structure into, and we would then determine, okay, there's no structural alert, so let's move on to the next stage of the process. And the next stage of the process would be to conduct some genotoxicity studies, and as I mentioned earlier, what we're looking for here is to determine whether the molecule actually reacts with DNA and could therefore be considered a genotoxic carcinogen. If there's no negative findings from the genotoxicity studies, we then move into the 2-year rodent toxicity studies, where we're looking at dosages, usually at many multiples of the human intake level. So if we know that the consumption levels are going to be of high-intensity sweetener of 100 milligrams, then we want to go to at least 100-fold higher than that within our toxicity study, because we're looking to determine or set an ADI that is going to cover all uses. And the objective of doing a carcinogenicity study is to determine whether there is any increases in individual tumor types. And then following the approval and the marketability of a sweetener, once it's been in the marketplace for a number of years, then we can look to conduct epidemiology studies to see if there's any evidence of an increase in any type of cancer from the consumption of these materials. There is a hierarchy or a weight of evidence type approach to assessing the safety and carcinogenicity of any food additive. And so prior to marketing a sweetener or a food additive, as I mentioned, we look at structure activity, we look at genotoxicity studies, but then the gold standard is the 2-year rodent carcinogenicity study. And these should be conducted to GLP standards and should follow internationally recognized guidelines, which are laid down